Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. This is Worship in the Time of Coronavirus, Safer Gatherings for Congregations. My name is Leah Wisty. I'm the Executive Director of Michigan Interfaith Power and Light, and we are so happy to welcome today Bishop Rayford Ray of the Episcopal Diocese of Northern Michigan, Lanni Lantto of UP Wild Church, and Bob Rich of Congregation Shaarey Zedek. And they will all be talking about what this looks like from their perspective in a time of coronavirus. How can we gather more safely? And in Lanni's case, she's actually going to be talking about an initiative that's not just a response to coronavirus, but includes spirituality and the outdoors. So it's not just about kind of choosing a poor substitute for, the regular church thing, but about actually connecting more deeply with the sacred in nature during this time. So we are recording, we'll share this with folks, and I'm gonna go ahead and get us started. I think I'm going to go ahead and get us started. There we go. So Michigan IPL, some of you know us. Our mission is to inspire and equip people of faith to exercise stewardship of and love for all creation. I'm going to give a brief kind of orientation to Zoom. I know many of you already know this, but I just want to invite you at any time if a question comes up, you can click on that chat button and you can type your question into the chat. My colleague Jennifer Young is with us and she's going to help me field those questions. There will be time for Q&A and discussion at the end, so we'll invite you to raise your hands, unmute yourself and ask your questions, but you can also type anything into the chat anytime along the way. And just so we have a sense of who is in the room, we would love for you to type in what congregation you are associated with, if any, what city you're in, and what your role is, right? We want to know who are we talking to and sort of where you're at. So I'd love to see that come in. And then I'll read off some of them too to help introduce everybody. So again, if you click on that chat button that comes up along the bottom, type in your congregation, what city, and what your role is. So we've got Hope Lutheran Church in Plainwell, the pastor from that church, Emmanuel Episcopal Church in Hastings, a member of their vestry, First Congregational Church in Rochester, and the role is Head of Emergency Preparedness Team. That sounds very official and appropriate. Grace Lutheran Church, Chair of Worship and Music Committee. Great. We've got a pastor from Tennessee, from Eusebia Presbyterian. First Congregational Church of Rochester, a member of the Reopening Task Team, someone from Portland, Oregon. Great. A former executive director of Havurah Shalom, Fort Street Presbyterian Church in Detroit on the session, Pine Hill Congregational, the pastor. Hi, Charles. Great. The Peace Committee up in St. Paul's Episcopal in Marquette. Great. Welcome, everybody. Okay, I'm going to keep moving along. Sorry, my computer is just moving a little bit slowly. Okay, so another Zoom orientation quickly. You can change the view if you want to see more people who's in the room. You can toggle back and forth between speaker view and gallery view. A couple of logistical items. We will send you the recording, we will send you the slides, and we will have a Q&A portion when we will invite you to raise your hand, unmute you, and you can ask your question. Or again, you can type questions into the chat anytime. All right, I was going to do a quick poll actually before we get to our first speaker. I'm going to do that right now. So we're interested to know Where is your congregation in the reopening process? 3 options. Whether if you resume services already, if you're planning for reopening now, or if you don't yet have plans to reopen anytime soon. I know congregations are all over the map on these questions, so we're just interested in who's here and where you are. Okay, great. Can folks see the live poll results as they come in? Not yet, okay. I think I have to end polling and then you'll see. So, okay, so responses are coming in, and I'll share the results in just a moment for you. Okay, I am gonna close the poll now, and I will share the results with you. So about half have resumed in-person services already. We've got 13% that are currently in the planning process, and about 40% that don't yet have plans to reopen anytime soon. Okay, great. That is useful. Thanks so much, everybody. I'm going to close that, and then we're going to move along to our first panelist. Here we go. So welcome, Bob Rich. He is the Executive Director of Congregation Shaarey Zedek, and that's in Southfield in Metro Detroit. I didn't ask your permission, Bob, but I hope it's okay that I share your email address here.
Great. Sure, no problem.
Okay, great. So Bob, take it away.
Thank you so much, Leah. And if you could flip to the first slide here, actually the one after it. But I just wanted to say a few words here about all of the interesting and really unprecedented work that we've been doing at Congregation Shaarey Zedek to prepare for balancing all of these different factors and figuring out how do we reopen, how do we serve our members as best we can, and how do we keep everybody safe at the same time. So to do that, the way I've structured this is to talk about some of the values that shaped our discussion process. While these are Jewish values, I imagine that many of you share some of the same values, so it would be useful to think about, how do we frame this in terms of values? And then going from there to process, because of course in a congregational setting, process is extremely important. What are the things that we considered? What did we come up with? And how did we tell everybody about it and make those decisions? So you can go to the next slide, please. The Congregation Shaarey Zedek is a congregation that brings together tradition and innovation. And we talk about this as being a place where tradition meets innovation, and they go to lunch together. So that as being our identity as an organization was really challenged by the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, because now we're not coming together and having lunch. So how do we reimagine everything in light of that, but still hold true to the tradition that we hold dear, right? So we are a conservative synagogue associated with the United Synagogues of Conservative Judaism, one of the earliest conservative synagogues, and so we want to preserve the tradition while also being innovative. If you go to the next slide, please. So this is before COVID-19, March 9th, 2020. The reality was just beginning to set in our congregation when we celebrated Purim, right? This wonderful holiday celebrating the redemption of the Jews of Persia. Involves dressing up in costume and a giant carnival. And even then we were starting to take precautions, hand washing, avoiding people shaking hands. And then as we realized how serious things had become, a lot of prayer that nobody got sick. And thank God, as far as we know, nobody did get sick from this, but we had easily 2,000 people in our building that evening. So if you could flip to the next slide, please. The onset of the coronavirus pandemic then was really led us to think about the Jewish values involved. And the most important one is what we call pikuach nefesh, which is the preservation of human life, taking precedence over all else. if it's a question of obeying any other Jewish law, with I think there's one or two exceptions, or preserving a life, it's always about preserving a life is the most important thing to do. And then to think about things like, how do we not endanger people's lives? How do we deal with modifying and mitigating the effects of the pandemic in light of our tradition, such an extraordinary moment? Thinking in terms of being responsible for one another, because there's such a collective community aspect of how do we protect each other from coronavirus, and ultimately to do it with profound love and kindness, what we call chesed. Could you flip to the next slide, please? So this really makes it hard. This pandemic really makes it hard to go on being the kind of congregation we want to be, because the traditional roles of a synagogue involve being a house of learning, a house of prayer, and a house of meeting. And on March 12th, we had a Zoom meeting with all of the other rabbis, other leadership of congregations, presidents, executive directors, and basically the entire Michigan Board of Rabbis voted unanimously to basically shut it all down. And so on that day, we canceled everything, all the in-person activities, sent all of the people working in the office home to work at home, and to really figure out how we're going to make this work. Next slide, please. And so since March 12th, we started thinking about how are we going to eventually get back into doing things in a in-person way. We established a number of task forces at the board level, a task force on building readiness to look at the safety procedures, and that's one that I chaired that we'll go into more detail about. We had a task force specifically looking at how does our worship need to change as a result of the pandemic. We had a task force on technology readiness, both from the perspective of our congregants connecting to services, as well as our staff being able to do the work that needs to be done. And then we had a task force on youth and family and the unique needs of that cohort. And then we conducted a congregational survey under board leadership to try to understand where our members were at. And of course, it was just a snapshot in time. People constantly are being bombarded by the news, but we wanted to get a feel of where people are at in terms of what they're comfortable with, what would they come to, what would they rather do online, and what else would they recommend. Next slide, please. So the task forces then made recommendations, and our executive team of the rabbis, myself, and the president looked at the decisions. And the big decisions were really, when are we going to open, for what, which or what in-person activities. The thing in the back of everybody's mind is, how do we deal with the high holy days, which are actually starting next week, and how are we going to communicate with members? Next slide, please. So some of the things that we looked at in specifically thinking about safety within the Building Readiness Task Force is how do we protect people from each other, right? What are the engineering things that we can do? When I say engineering, I mean things that you put in place that are going to be physical barriers for people from doing something that might not be safe. For example, we have ropes and stanchions in the lobby, or certain doors being locked, or in some cases, because we don't want people to touch the doors, maybe propping the doors open is the right thing to do. Putting up chairs and tables in safe places, setting up AV to enable people to connect remotely, and thinking about attendance limits. One thing we settled on pretty quickly is that we were going to require pre-registration for everything that we do, whether it's a service or an educational program or a celebration. We need to know who's getting together. So in the worst case, God forbid somebody tests positive, we're able to assist in contact tracing. And we also agreed early on that we were going to adhere to the legal limits in Michigan on gathering. That is 10 people inside in a gathering and 100 people outside, currently is where it's at. We understand that as houses of worship that we're not going to be prosecuted if we violate those limits, but we felt that we did not want to take advantage of that exemption, that we wanted to stick to the letter of the law. And then policies, things like liability waivers, how do we discourage the elderly, a large portion of our congregation how do we discourage them from coming to in-person activities while not turning off everybody else? Physical distancing, mass restrooms, and just countless other things you'll see, and how we can enforce the policies, especially with the member who decides to be difficult. So what do we do about that? Can you flip to the next slide, please? So what we came up with is, for staff at least, we would be logging everybody in through the MI symptoms page. It's a wonderful resource that allows people to quickly record their temperature, record their symptoms, and get a green light if they're safe to go and come into the building, or yellow light if they're not. We do screening of temperatures for everybody coming in. We collect health survey information from everybody who shows up. We require physical distancing, maybe above and beyond what's required, but physical distancing of 10 feet for people inside and 6 feet for people outside. Can you go back to the next one, please? And then also we require masks at all times on the property, except if you're in a private office with your door closed. So that is for staff, right? So thankfully, our building has private offices for each of the staff, so we're able to keep people physically separated in their own offices without needing to wear their mask all day. Lots of hand washing and sanitizer, liability waivers that our lawyers insisted on putting in, limits on restroom use, one person at a time, washing your hands before and after, and lots of cleaning and disinfecting. Next slide, please. In addition to that, we shut down the drinking fountains, asked people, please stay home if you're sick, created traffic lanes to keep people at a distance from each other, cut out all the food service. This was a really particularly painful one for us because we did thrive so much on the community luncheons, but no food service except prepackaged and catered plated meals. Remote work. Okay, and seating. Let me move on quickly. So next slide, please. Okay, so here's some pictures of some of the things we do. You can see we have a lot of sanitizer. We have an outdoor pavilion that we've been able to do outdoor services in, keep people at a distance, signage. Next slide, please. Can you get the next one up? Thank you. Communication's a big thing. Basically, the answer to communication is all of the above. We created a cute little video you can check out on our website. The registration I mentioned, explain to people what to do, what not to do. Ultimately, though, because we're a house of worship, we want people to calm down and pray and realize we can do this safely, consider the risks, but it's not the end of the world. Next slide, please. Okay, so the synagogue has always been open. That's one of our key messages. Even though the building may not be open for activities, the synagogue is open. We spent a lot of time and effort reaching out to members by phone, organizing online activities, classes, services, and we've made sure that people understand we're here, we're not shut down. And then, of course, the Michigan Safe Start Plan. I encourage everybody to check that out if you're in Michigan, because that was a really good guidance. Next slide, please. Okay, High Holidays coming up this next week. We, as well as all the other Reform and Conservative Jewish synagogues in the area, decided to absolutely not have members come to our High Holiday services. Historically, those services would draw several thousand people. We are not having any of that. So it's all happening online. We're doing professional streaming from the sanctuary, but we have started to have small services on Friday nights outdoors on our pavilion, which has worked really well. Also, we started having some kids and youth programs available, and taking advantage of the nice weather we've had here the last few weeks, done shofar blowing in the park to welcome in the new holiday, and we're going to be doing traveling tashlik, a ceremony down by the river. Next slide. So just to wrap up then, people ask me all the time, so what's going to happen? When are you going to be open for in-person services inside the sanctuary? I can't know. I don't know. When will things be back to normal? Not for a while. Um, and then there's the whole question of understanding what people want and being empathetic with what they want, but realizing that they can't have what they want just yet. But what can we do? And then making sure we take safety into account and do things as best we can to provide people with what they want. Um, and planning for contingencies, religious school. Who knows what religious school is going to be like by December? But there is hope because this will pass. We will be able to gather again. Next slide, please. So I do have a whole report with lots and lots of details. I know my time is up, so I want to just refer you to this. Please check it out. It's a full report, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Next slide. And that's all I have to say. Thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Bob. All right, so my colleague Jennifer just dropped the link in the chat to a few slides back. There was a screenshot of a video, which I strongly encourage you to check out. It's a sort of fun video in which the rabbi or one of the rabbis over at Shaarey Zedek is kind of walking folks through the safety instructions, and there's, good humor and that sort of fun. And if you want to see the guide to reopening shul, it's a template where you can kind of fill in your particular congregation stuff as you decide it. You can check that out on our website, and Jennifer will add the link there. So thank you again to Bob, especially since we know this is such a busy time with high holidays coming up around the corner. All right, we're gonna go to our next panelist, who is Bishop Rayford Ray, and he's going to be talking about what this looks like in the Upper Peninsula and what the Episcopals are doing. Rayford, are you off mute?
I am now.
Excellent. Great.
Yeah, the Episcopal Diocese of Northern Michigan comprises the entire Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and we're about 30% of the landmass of Michigan, but only 3% of the population. And that's somewhat reflective of the Episcopal Church, which our membership is between 1,500 and 2,000 here. But we certainly have increased since the COVID, because of we've done some innovative work online, and we now have people in attendance. Between 1,000 and 2,000 people are attending our worship services online. So that's been a push that we've been forced into, and out of it, comes for us what we call the resurrection. And so that's where we're at. Before I move on, I just need to talk about the Episcopal Church in Michigan is composed of 4 dioceses throughout the state, and we have gathered together as one entity in making decisions about safety and participating in congregational life. In our opening document that we sent out to our Michigan diocese, we said, as people of faith, we follow the commandment, and these are parts of our values that Jesus gave us, to love our neighbor as ourselves. Loving our neighbors these days in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic means setting limits. And this is how we love our neighbors, by working to slow the spread of this extremely contagious, life-threatening virus. We know that coming together, even in the best of reasons, can spread this disease. So on March 17th, we issued a directive that put all of our 203 congregations in hiatus from in-person gathering until May 10th. And then that directive was extended to around July the 1st of this past year. We offered a plan for how we might engage reentry, and we call it a plan for reentry for Great Lakes Episcopalians. It articulates 3 phases for reentry into our new normal. For the Episcopal Church here in Michigan, we're now in phase 2, and many of our congregations are meeting outdoors, or if indoors, they have to maintain here in the Upper Peninsula, which is part of the Region 8, a 25% of its maximum capacity is the required limit. And for the rest of the state, it is, I believe, no more than 10 persons indoors. So we continue as the Episcopal Church throughout the state to follow Governor Gretchen Whitmer's executive order. You know, we'll take a look at the document in our 3 phases in a few minutes. But I also think we cannot miss this opportunity here is that as a church, that we have not left out the injustice being revealed by this pandemic, because we also need to say that, you know, we continue to respond to this pandemic in the way we gather for worship and formation and fellowship. We must consider how to respond more fully to the injustices being revealed by its pandemic, the food insecurities, the racial bias, access to healthcare, a living wage, housing, and education. So as people of faith, we believe in the power of the resurrection and new life, and we're committed to naming and addressing these injustices so that the kingdom of God may come nearer. So if we can move to taking a look at the document, which I think is up. It's a plan for Great Lakes Episcopalians. This was a directive from all the Michigan Diocese, and individual congregations are being directed to follow these guidelines. Here in the Upper Peninsula, each congregation had to come up with a plan and then submit it to the diocese for us to take a look at, and then we made recommendations. Communities themselves decided if they're going to reopen or go online or meet in person in July the 1st. But as you can see, the phase 1 was reentry, 2 was deeper participation, reentries 2, hiatus was 1, deeper participation in phase 3. You know, basic, as you've heard, we're asked to wear masks, physically distance at least 6 feet from one another, no touching, wash hands, sanitize. We encourage the use of online tools, especially for our vulnerable population. So that means Sunday worship, daily office prayers, Bible studies, or small group formation and fellowship. Each of the phases, and you can find that on our website, we look at the building use, the worship and formation, and then service and outreach. You know, for example, in hiatus 1, you know, again, digital tools and stuff, and that goes on. But there were no in-person contact during that time. Phase 2, there were more limited in-person gatherings, and then we moved into phase 2. We, as Diocese, which was optional, invited communities that they could share in Holy Communion. And then phase 3, we go into a deeper participation. Again, you know, we will always have events held online, worship services online. You know, we're inviting communities not to have, and that's a must, as most communities or faith communities have gatherings afterward for coffee hour. We don't have those anymore. I mean, it's very kind of just, you come in for worship and then you leave. If you're going to gather, you can gather outside. If you're doing in person, if you're doing outside worship services, of course, that relaxes more of our time together in terms of conversation. So we also have in addressing positive infections. We have been lucky here in the Episcopal Diocese of Northern Michigan. We've had no positive cases in our communities, our faith communities. We've had some in terms of extended families, but none within our communities, because we are abiding by kind of a strict rule in terms of how we gather, and that's been part of the success of it all. So I'm going to turn it over to Lanni next, because I think my 10 minutes are almost up. And that was pretty a quick, fast summation, but you can go to our website to find a lot of our information.
Thank you so much, Rayford. And Jennifer will drop the link to that guide that you mentioned and from which a lot of this text came from into the chat, just so you have it super handy. So thank you again, Rayford. Rayford, we're also lucky to have Rayford on our Michigan Interfaith Power and Light Board of Directors. And I am pleased to introduce next Lanni Lantto from Wild Church UP. So for anybody who attended our conference last fall in November, you may have learned may have gotten a little taste of Wild Church, but I will turn it over to Lanni to talk more.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you so much for organizing this. I love learning from everybody when I come to these as well. I'm going to drop some links into the chat box right now, just so you have them while I'm speaking. And if it doesn't work, I'll do it at the end as well. So I want to begin by just sort of saying, you know, what is Wild Church? This is probably a new term to a lot of us. I'm going to begin with logistically, what are we? Well, we are a new worshiping community, also known as a church plant, with funding support from the Episcopal Diocese and the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America's Northern Great Lakes Synod. So I am a lay leader, mission developer, which basically means that my job is to design ministry offerings and worship experiences that respond to the spiritual needs of those who are not finding a community, not finding formation in traditional church settings. So I have a little bit of a different context here. But the way that our new worshiping community and our church plant did begin was by asking the question, where have all the young people gone from our churches? I'm sure a lot of you can resonate with asking that question. So I will not get into this right now because it's a whole webinar in itself, but I began by meeting with these young adults who were no longer attending churches, having coffee with them pre-COVID times, of course, and just asking them to share their values, share why they weren't going to church. And through those conversations, what I found was that they expressed a deep connection with nature. They also expressed an openness to encountering the mystery of all life and a desire to share with their families the way of God. But it was clear that they were not going to step back into a church. So therefore, my job became how do we work in and with nature to facilitate a spiritual connection then? One really good way of doing that, and we did this pre-COVID, was we do not have a building space. So I have the nature in the background. That's where we meet. So we began as a community to intentionally meet outdoors. We would do this in rotating public parks. We were also offered church lawn spaces because I was looking at everybody in the chat box who's coming from different denominations and congregations, and that's a lot like who shows up at UP Wild gatherings, is who's here today watching this. We are cross-denominational. A lot of people don't have a faith background as well. So we began by navigating but what about questions, right? What about the bugs? What about the heat? What about mobility? What about audio? So far, we really had no issues there. I think that's mainly because in the beginning, I'm very clear with the intentions of why we're gathering, the limitations of mobility, if it's going to be a hike, that it might be intermediate, and being also pretty clear with directions. So Leah's showing you just some slides. They're not really in any order. It's just to kind of show you the things that we offer. So I wanted to visually maybe just walk you through what a Wild Church gathering is. Imagine that now we're wearing face masks, so that this is what we were doing prior to COVID as well. We would meet in a space in nature. We meet in a circle, 6 feet apart. In the beginning, I offer a wilderness reflection. So this is unearthing ancient Christian wisdom, or it's calling forth a voice of a saint or a contemporary author that touches on some aspect of stewardship of creation. And we begin by reflecting on that. Then we take time for solitary movement into nature, actually. And this allows them time it's between them and God. And I usually give a little bit of guidance of what they can do for about 10 to 15 minutes. They take their time in nature. It's almost like their sermon but that's their time with God. They get to behold the awe and wonder of God's creation. And then we come back into circle and we share our experiences. And kids really do actually love that part. We haven't really been gathering with kids right now, just given the circumstances of I have a toddler and I know he will touch everything. So we've been taking a break from our kids gathering and hopefully moving more online with that. Lastly, we pray together, and we always make the space to include their petitions. And I wanted to talk briefly about other things that we're doing now as a response. We're taking these wilderness hikes in person once a month, where all I'll do is really read a psalm. We'll stop and we'll read a psalm. But what I've noticed is that once I've taken these online, which I probably would not have thought of doing, but as a response to not being able to really meet very well online, also we're in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where we have snow most of the year. That's real, of course. I'm sure the weather is going to be real for a lot of you in the different places as we're transitioning into a new season, right? I have found that by taking these virtual wilderness walks online, so I go and I film it by myself with a steady cam, and I walk for about 20 minutes on a trail or somewhere in the Upper Peninsula. And then over that, I create a service over that, whether it's the voices of other community members in UP Wild sharing their connection with nature. The last one we did, we contemplated what did God mean when he spoke to Moses, you're standing on holy ground. And so those are all online. And when I share the link to our website, you can participate in those. And it's just a great way to be able to encounter the wilderness when you can't actually go into the wilderness. So why is it important to facilitate a spiritual connection, and not just in this missional context? You know, we're a missional church, but why is it important otherwise? Well, an interesting thing has happened. Half of the people that show up have an active, happy, strong church life. Half of the people don't. We weren't expecting, I think, those half that actually attend their services regularly on Sunday, but we're finding that a lot of people are coming to Wild Church to get something that they're not getting from their traditional church services. And so what does this tell us? It tells us that people are looking for a response. They're looking for guidance and how to respond to these pressing issues of our times. We are in the middle of a pandemic, right? It's caused by the commodification and consumption habits. We have a lot of severe weather going on that's only going to be getting stronger and more severe all over the world. So how do our religious traditions respond as active participants of the love of the Gospels? And I will just comment quickly, that was taken from a screenshot when we went live. And everybody was wearing a face mask, but I was talking to people at home. What an interesting thing to gather in person and go live on Facebook. It's very interesting, and we get a lot of people online watching live as well. So if you're thinking about going online, it's not a bad idea. We have been able to expand our outreach that way. But COVID has provided us with an opportunity, all of us, with an opportunity to pray and reflect and act. And we've witnessed that a fully lived out spiritual connection and a recognition of nature is bringing about healing. Because if we read the scriptures, right, with an ecological lens, you realize that God's covenant is with all of creation. And for Christians, that the liberation and the reconciliations of all things is a single act of salvation. So it's this realization in our own minds, in a sense, of creation not being a passive participant, but that if you read the Old Testament and the New, that creation is actively an active participant. It's acting with us. So when we worship with creation outdoors, we are inviting we are inviting all of what God has created into participation with our worship. And what has been very interesting when people share is that, did you hear that goose? I never heard that before. Did you hear the lake? I've never sat to listen to the lake before. And that the praise of all creation, the praise, the only voice that God gave them, right? We are being able to listen to it, acknowledge it, and join our voices in together. So we gather as one congregation rather than being walled off, which normally, and I grew up in a church, you know, normally you're walled off from all of creation. When you invite that inclusivity and that expansion, even when you're inside, and I can talk about how we do that when we go inside as well, it becomes habitual to notice the things that we don't usually notice, that we're loved into being by God. And when it becomes habitual, we therefore fall back in love with it. And love is transformative, right? Love, the power of love, you will find God. So instead of just focusing on a green committee that meets in the basement, you know, once a month, we really are a missional context where we ask, how can we live out this call to stewardship in our prayer, in our preaching, in our music, in all aspects? And so another link I'm sharing with you is Deep Green Church, and they work with congregations on how to incorporate more of creation into all aspects of what you're offering. And also the Wild Church Network, which has different liturgies and prayers for the seasons that you can use freely on their website. So lastly, just to wrap up, when our motivation really moves beyond crisis mode, and we see that what will motivate us is more missional, you know, when we're asking how can we move forward, how can we transition, we really do believe at UP Wild Church that when our radical hospitality extends to the whole created order, we will be more prepared for this great turning that we're in the midst of, but it's going to continue, this great turning. And that what's going to happen through our faith and our hope is that we will feel this hospitality return to us as well. Thank you. I'll answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Lanni. All right, we are going to move into Q&A. All right, let me advance the slide here. Sorry, there's a bit of a lag. All righty, so I've got a little screenshot here of how we're going to do Q&A. So you should see on the black toolbar at the bottom of your screen a place to raise your hand. And so if you've got a question, you can again type it into the chat. We can read it aloud and then let our panelists field it. Or if you'd prefer to ask a question, you know, verbally, just raise your hand. We'll call on you. We'll unmute you, and then we can have a discussion from there. And I'm going to stop the screen share so that I can have a better view of all of our attendees. All right, so who's got questions for these three awesome panelists? And if I don't see questions from the crowd, I will ask my questions. All right, so you know, one of the things that I am curious about, and Bob, you kind of alluded to this, you know, we are human communities, and human communities contain folks who might be a little difficult sometimes. And I wonder, you know, and it sounds like possibly Bob and Rayford, you might be able to address this. You know, if you've encountered issues with someone who isn't willing to follow procedures or is resisting in some way, how have you coped with that? Just jump in.
Sure. So that's a great question. You know, it was actually, we were more concerned about it in advance of opening up for in-person activities than what actually transpired. In short, the reality is that almost everybody has been willing to obey the rules, has been cooperative, has kept their distance, has worn their masks. Where we see problems is people inadvertently doing things like forgetting to pull their mask up, or inadvertently getting close to somebody else. So like this sort of willful resistance we were afraid of about didn't really come about, at least with our congregation. One thing also that I'll say though is that we did get people who thought, well, you shouldn't do this or you should do that. You should have these different rules, and they're entitled to their opinion. But because we had this whole task force of their peers that pulled the policies together, we were able to justify that this is the policy, basically take it or leave it politely is what it amounts to.
Same with us up here in the Upper Peninsula. I think 99.9% of the people have followed the directives. And if they're not, we just do a gentle nudge, you know, and if we have to say it before we begin our services, you know, your masks are up, you know, over your nose, and you know, we just give gentle nudges. We've had one incident where someone decided that they were going to sing, you know, and our director said that there is no singing at this time, and we just had to have a personal conversation with that person. And so that's how we've been dealing with that. But 99.9% people are following the directives. And I think that also has prevented the spread of the disease within our faith communities, and we're able to worship together.
That's great. Thank you. Bob, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Only other thing I might mention is that we do have more discussion and debate about what should be done in advance of an in-person activity than actually on site. By the time you get to the actual activity, people are pretty much okay with the rules. But, you know, we've had discussions about, okay, so should we be holding this inside or not? And, you know, we've been sticking to the principles I mentioned earlier that, you know, no more than 10 people on a gathering inside. And that's not always the popular place to be, but that's where we are.
Thank you. I see that Kari Fast has their hand up. Go ahead, Kari.
Thank you. This is Carrie Fost, and Bob, you kind of already tipped your hat a little bit towards my question. That is that what are ideas and strategies to help people during this time of not worshiping in person? We don't have the technology and the capacity to worship outdoors. So what are strategies that you have used, all of you have used, to, in the meantime, to satisfy that in-person experience?
So we've been doing Zoom based services pretty much since the initial shutdown of in-person activities. And as we've learned, we've gotten better at it. Made them more interactive, giving people roles in the services so you can see everybody else. Following services, one of our favorite things to do is sort of a schmooze room, we call it, where open up everybody's mics and give them a chance to wish each other Shabbat Shalom. That works really well. Also, we've done like discussions with the rabbi after services where people can ask questions and discuss. We've had online activities that allow people to see each other. For example, we'll use the spotlight feature in Zoom to go around during our concluding song and spotlight each member in turn so that everybody can see them on their screen.
Thank you.
Yeah, we do basically have done the same for persons using that are not able to come into our faith communities. We use Zoom as a way. We also have coffee hour, you know, generally, and so our communities can come to those coffee hours and touch base because at least for us here, we're very relational. Mm-hmm. And so we encouraged doing that, but also using the phone system the old way. Mm-hmm. People just checking in to see how they're doing is important also, and we've encouraged communities to do that.
Thank you.
Just chime in real quick that we use Facebook Live, YouTube platform, also Zoom. But what I found, if you can't be there live, because in our context, sometimes you can't be in nature live because of the weather, that I'll always be present. I'll premiere something at a certain time. I'll tell people when it's going to be, and I will be there live in the comments so that there's a live commentary going on if you can't do something live.
Thank you.
Pastor Mays, you had a question. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hello, friends. I'm in a context in northern Michigan and Charlevoix at a Native American Methodist church where we have not met in person since March 8th because of all the things that we've been talking about today. We do have a large, our sanctuary is a small log structure, so it's just not going to work for more than a couple people at a time. I've been live streaming from that sanctuary, but we have a large hall. And my question is, have any of you found some trustworthy ventilation experts? We have only in-floor heating in that hall, which is kind of helpful because we don't have forced air blowing things around. We have windows on all 4 perimeters, especially 2 of them, a lot of windows, and a covered porch. So that's also good. But what I'm not sure about is what to do with floor fans. I've heard a couple of options. One, to face them out on one side and have outside air coming in and blowing across the room, but that also seems to possibly spread the aerosol. So we're looking for somebody that can help us know what best to do with ventilation when we do bring people back into that space. So I'll crowdsource unless some of our panelists already know the answer to that question.
So this is the second webinar in a series that we've done on safe reopening for congregations. And our first one, we had a panelist who is a building professional, and she brought some recommendations from Shaarey, which is the Society for Heating and Cooling Professionals. We've got that reference on our website. I wonder if Jennifer, you could drop that into the chat. It sounds like a couple of the basics are you want to increase the air exchange. So, just don't let the air circulate within, but try to get as much flowing out as possible. And then there are also filters that you can add. But please look at the Shaarey resource that Jennifer has put into the chat. We've also got a participant here, Simon Wren, who works in HVAC. So you could connect with each other. You could privately chat using the chat function. So that is there. I also saw a note in the chat earlier from Edna, who I think is with the UU congregation of Flint, just referencing the prior webinar about cleaning air and water inside and outside the building. I wasn't clear, Edna, if that was a question or if you just wanted to pipe in, so feel free to unmute yourself and share your question or comment. And who else has got questions for us here for our panelists? I see a note in the chat, just inviting Simon, who is an HVAC expert, to share. Simon, is there anything that you wanted to share about HVAC recommendations?
Sure. I think the first question was whether portable fans should be used within a space, and the answer is absolutely not. Yeah. You might, if you have a ventilation issue where you can open windows and maybe direct the exhaust fan to help move air out of the building, that would make sense. But it would not blow air because that just moves viruses from one area of the room to another. You're spreading virus by using a portable fan within the space.
Thanks. That was my fear. If you were making that decision, Simon, would you place fans on one wall side, windows blowing out so that it's pulling fresh air from the opposite side of the room and moving it all in that one direction? Or would you just not use fans at all?
If I didn't have outside air being brought into the building, I had a large number, I would open windows, remove the screens, because the screens tend to take out some of the positive ions that are in outside air, or open doors. And if there's enough natural air movement, just use that. If it's a very calm day, then I would just put fans on one door or one window and blow out on that one side of the building and just let it gradually move through the outside air, move in through the building. Hopefully,
thank you, I appreciate that.
Fans behind, in the back of the sanctuary is where I put the fans, in the back, so air is moving backwards.
Thank you for the advice, I appreciate it. And I did see the video for the previous session, Leah, so I haven't watched it yet, but we'll go back and watch that.
Got it.
I actually am one of Sonia's colleagues, so.
Oh, wonderful. And Simon, if you're open to it, you know, if you're available for questions and you wanted to share your email address in the chat, totally up to you. But if you want to allow people to connect with you later on, I invite you to.
Yeah, that would be very helpful, because a lot of our communities are you know, those that are outdoors are going to the buildings.
Right,
that would be
right.
helpful, Simon. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I can do that. I'll share my contact information. I can be called on my cell phone. It's usually the best thing, because I find these sort of things usually are better to talk and then follow up with an email. But because everyone's situation is just a little bit different.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Simon. Really.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah.
It's nice to be retired.
That's a wonderful thing. I see a possibly a hand. Is it Ms. Brown? Were you raising your hand? Would you like to ask a question? Okay, go ahead and unmute yourself. There you go.
Oh, good afternoon. I'm Von Sil Brown Miller with Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church out of Detroit. And I'm on the committee to reopen our church, or to do a re-entry, not reopen, but re-entry. We've been meeting virtually for, well, since March. And I think you know, this just reassured me that we're certainly on the right track in terms of how we're going about re-entry. I'm really impressed with the Wild Church, because I've always thought that we should bring more of the ministry out into the community, out into the open, where you commune with nature and people. And so I am really gonna try to take some of that back because I think we could, you know, pray anywhere. So I really like that. What are you all, the people who have their church open, what are you doing about the sterilization of restrooms? Is that per person? Do you do it on a schedule? How are you doing that?
Shall I take that one? So we have, in terms of restrooms, whenever we have services with a sizable number of people, and right now we're doing about 50, 60 people in our outdoor services, but of course they want to use the restrooms. We have a restroom attendant, and basically what happens is after each person goes into the restroom and comes out, the restroom attendant goes in and cleans and sterilizes the toilet and the sink that person used.
Mm. Okay. We thought we may have to do something like that. Okay.
Yeah, some of our congregations here in the Upper Peninsula, they have you know, sanitation wipes and stuff in the bathrooms, so they invite people to help sanitize after they're using the bathrooms.
Yeah, that to me makes sense.
You know, and then we have some of our communities certainly have people that come in and sanitize after services.
And we also, another thing that we do is we strongly encourage people on big signs, wash your hands before and after using the facilities. The before allows them to hopefully not be contaminating any surfaces on their way in.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Rob Jackson, I'm a family physician. And am I still on this?
You sure are. Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah.
This
Okay.
will be our
My internet
last
just did
question.
something weird. It's been thought that surfaces are less important than we once thought. So I wouldn't get too worried about that. It's probably more person to person, you know, aerosols, if you will, that are probably more important. I think, you know, the idea of having, especially my church is smaller, we wouldn't be able to hire somebody to cleaning bathrooms after everything. So having the individual do something, clean the areas they were at, makes a lot of sense to me. Just because it makes everybody feel a little better. So perception is important too. But my challenge in my congregation is there are a number of people who are very, very afraid, who are on our board of session, who, how can I put it, we're trying to figure out how do we move forward. They may not want to move forward for a year and a half, and we just don't. What we're trying to balance those two sides, and I don't want to be cavalier because, you know, as a family doc, I'm this morning I was testing people for COVID, so it's not. I'm a little less afraid at this point, but I don't know how we balance the fear and yet the desire to do some things. Even small gatherings, we have baptisms, right? We have other things that are maybe more intimate, and even we're holding back doing those. Any wisdom?
Yeah, well, you know, that's really an important point, right? We've had a lot of what's the word? Some very colorful conversations within our task force and within our board about what should be done, because every single person has their own risk tolerance. And like you say, there's a whole spectrum of people who think, no big deal, we can do anything we want, it's going to be fine, all the way up to people who don't want to come together in any way for the next 2 years. And so I think it really is, you know, one of the key leadership functions of like a board, to make a decision about where on that spectrum we're going to be as an organization. For us, it comes down to our values that I mentioned in my presentation, and how do we best uphold those values and at the same time accomplish the mission of the congregation of bringing people together. And so we tend to be pretty conservative about it, but we are having face-to-face services outside. We are having, you know, shofar blowing outside. There are things that we do because we feel that the risk is minimal compared to the benefit of bringing people together. But ultimately, it really is a leadership decision.
Yeah, for us, it's always to honor and respect a person's decision on that, and you know, and we know that this virus is going to be with us for a while, and risks are going to have to be taken as we gather together, and so.
But thank you. I know there is no answer to this, but I just thought I'd like to hear wisdom. I'm a family doc in practice. If anyone here wants to contact me about issues, I'm providing my email.
You're going to put your email down? That'd be great.
Yes, it's in the chat. It can be shared, Leah, and others.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
With the people here, not the whole world.
All Alrighty, thank you for that clarification. I was about to email the world and I stopped myself. So, great. Okay, great. And there was one more question in the chat that I missed that Jennifer brought my attention to. And then I know we're running a few minutes over, so we're going to close up after that. But Edna posed the question, I think she's from the UU Church in Lansing, wondering for those who are holding services outdoors or doing activities outdoors, what kind of outdoor audiovisual equipment are you using?
I was just going to say we don't actually use any, so maybe I can defer this to Rayford because we have a small enough amount of people, and I wear a face mask. They can all hear me.
Yeah, we have our microphones out, so and we've even had in one community they brought out because they had internet access a TV set. Put it out there and watched a sermon on that or some music. I mean, it became very creative in how to gather. So, yeah.
Do you happen to know, Rayford, what kind of microphone it is or like where you would get such a thing?
Yeah, we got it online, but I will, I'll connect with Jane, who's in the other office and stuff, and I'll send it to you so it can go out.
Okay, great.
Yeah. And it's
So
not,
for us, the things that we do at our building, we use the same outside sound system that we've used in the past. I should point out that for outdoor services, because we want our cantors, our musical leaders to be able to be heard and to sing fully, we separate them from everybody else by 25 feet because that's the guidance around singing. And then the only way they're going to be heard well is with a microphone. So we do that for outdoor activities, 25 feet between the person singing without a mask and the others. For the things we're doing in the park and other non-conventional locations, we invested in a little speaker system that's portable, battery rechargeable, so that we can be heard out in wherever we go.
yeah, we've done the same thing, and I think this, the ones that one of the community got was only $150. Sounds a lot, but it really isn't that much in terms.
Yeah, ours was a little less than 100, and yeah, I mean it doesn't cost much, but it really is worth doing to be able to be heard. Plus, it like I say, it allows people to maintain more distance. The other thing we do with the outdoor activities in unconventional locations is I take some rope, like a yellow rope, and basically map out the distance around where the rabbi or the cantor is standing so that people know this is how far away you have to be in order to be safe.
Excellent. Okay, great. I wanted to let you all know about a couple of upcoming things that Michigan IPL has and to thank our panelists one last time. So I'm going to go back to screen sharing and then I will wish you all a good afternoon. So thank you again so much to Bob, Rayford, and Lanni. Really appreciate your sharing your wisdom, and to all of you who joined us today and asked your good questions.
Good.
All right. Oh, I'm just trying to advance the slide. There we go. Okay. Just quickly, I wanted to let folks know about a couple of energy programs we have going on. So we've got an energy efficiency free program for houses of worship that have consumers energy service. You get a lot of free stuff. We've had 800 congregations across Michigan participate in this already. And we know that when you spend less on energy, you can spend more on your missions. We've also got an energy-related fundraising opportunity for congregations. This is another free program that members of congregations can get energy efficiency services at home. They can be completely contactless in this age of COVID, and your congregation can earn up to $5,000 in cash. Again, this is just if your members and friends have consumers energy service. And then I also wanted to let you know, so, in addition to caring for creation through practical measures like saving energy, we also want to organize people of faith to use their moral voices in voting. So we are nonpartisan, but that doesn't mean we are non-participating. So we have got a Faith Climate Justice Voter Pledge, and we're asking folks to sign it. Jennifer has just dropped that link in the chat, but so we're asking folks to sign it to say you are going to vote in November with climate justice in mind. You're going to encourage your friends to vote, and we'll send you email reminders about deadlines and that sort of thing. And I think that might be my last slide. Yes, it is. Okay, thank you so much, all of you, for joining. We will follow up with a recording and with copies of the slides and various links. So thanks so much to everybody, and I hope you have a lovely afternoon. Okay, bye-bye now.